only thing we have to fear is
In war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to WallBuilders Live. This is the intersection of faith and politics, and we're glad you're with us this evening. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton, and it's going to be a great topic tonight. It's our first opportunity to have you actually see what we're doing, not just listen to WallBuilders Live, so we're glad to welcome you into the WallBuilders Live studio. And we're going to be having our special guest, Mike Farris, on here in just a few minutes. A couple of housekeeping things. If you haven't noticed already, our questions this evening are via email and Twitter. So you can see the slide there on your screen. You can either send in a question to radio@wallbuilders.com, or you can use the Twitter hashtag WBL, that's for WallBuilders Live, and COS, Convention of States. So WBL, COS, and you can also engage in discussion there on Twitter if you use that hashtag. So welcome to WallBuilders Live. And David, tonight's a topic that's actually, we've done a few programs here on WallBuilders Live about this. It's a hot topic, a lot of folks talking about it. Really probably even a year ago, this was a part of the Constitution that hardly anybody even knew existed, that states could actually have a convention to amend the Constitution.
Well, it's one of the cool things that we've been talking about that's happened in the last year, actually the last 2 years, is people are actually discovering parts of the Constitution they didn't know existed, or what they've been told about the Constitution turns out not to be right. And so this is a really healthy thing that here we have a really discussion tonight, a forum on Constitution states. And I mean, within just a couple of hours, the email going out, this thing was maxed out at 1,500 people.
Right,
I mean, that quick. People wanted to be on this thing. And so that's a really healthy sign for the country, is that we're actually starting to talk about parts of the Constitution in depth that we didn't even know existed 2 years ago.
And we've seen that on our Thursday programs here on the program, because we open it up to questions about the Constitution, and man, we've been getting flooded with not simple questions. I mean, a lot of times it's a question that gives me a chance to go learn something about the Constitution I hadn't even really looked at. So I've enjoyed that, but the people have really surprised us with how in-depth they are wanting to go with the Constitution.
And again, that's healthy. The John Jay quote that we love to use a lot is that you need to study and you need to know the Constitution, you need to defend and you need to assert it. And you've got the slide there in front, and that slide says every member of the state ought diligently, and I love that word diligently because that's what's starting to happen, to read and study the Constitution, to teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they're violated, be the better prepared to defend and assert them. And that diligently study, to read and study, that's starting to happen now, and that's a healthy thing.
It is. Okay, so now as people are studying it, I think they're looking at the Constitution itself, and they're learning what the founders intended. Then they're looking at their government and going, wait. There's a lot of stuff happening in Washington, D.C. that is not constitutional. What can I do about it?
Well, let's talk about Article 5 for a minute, because that is an interesting part of the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, when they did the Federalist Papers, and the Federalist Papers are considered to be the most authoritative commentary on the Constitution, at least that's what James Madison said. And so in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton talks about, we gave every branch constitutional tools for self-defense. And so the states have a constitutional tools for self-defense. The people have the Ninth Amendment is the people, 10th Amendment is the states. So all of these entities, you got the president, you got the Congress, you have bicameral Congress, you've got the judges, you have the people, and you have the states. Those are the major entities. Every one of them has constitutional tools for self-defense. And one of the tools for self-defense that the Founding Fathers gave to the states to help enforce the 10th Amendment was Article 5, that the states, whenever they think Congress is getting out of bounds, they can call a convention and they can propose amendments to the Constitution. And let's say Congress has refused to act, and Congress has refused to act on a number of amendments, and all the states have to do is say, okay, we'll act. We're closer to the people. You guys are not listening well, so we'll do something. And that notion of convention of the states, and I'm going to make a big distinction tonight, because you and I have talked about this before, but you and I both 3 years ago were opposed to this notion.
Yeah,
I mean, we were opposed to, and
worried about what could happen, all the reasons that
Well, and in my case, it was because I'd been told about Article 5. I hadn't read Article 5, and so Article 5, I always heard, well, that's about a constitutional convention. I don't want a constitutional convention. No, And
I don't want them starting over.
That's right.
I don't want them to, throw
That's
the whole
right.
thing out and start over.
And
right.
I'm not. And so tonight, I'm not going to call it a constitutional convention because it's not. It's
That's
a
right.
convention of these states.
And I used to make that mistake. I even would do that in Constitution classes. I'd be teaching. I'd use that word, constitutional convention, and somebody corrected me and said, "Wait a minute, that means we're starting over and doing it all
That's right.
over again. This is not a constitutional convention." Our guest tonight, I think, has really helped to frame the right
That's right.
terminology, convention of states.
And I'll tell you what really got me was when you see Article 5, and it's there on the screen in front of you, the slide that you see, it says that you can, in the middle there says the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments as part of this Constitution. That means you can't have a runaway convention that comes up with a new Constitution. You can propose amendments to this Constitution. We can't propose a new Constitution. That can be done elsewhere, another way. But a convention of the states can't do that. They can propose amendments to this Constitution. So that's the first check on a runaway Constitution or runaway convention is the Constitution language itself.
Yeah.
And I had never read that. I'd always been told, and by the way, I got to go back to the original one because I was always told that, well, a runaway convention, that's how it originally happened in the first place. They sent the Founding Fathers there to amend the Articles of Confederation, and they ran away with the convention and came up with the Constitution.
How many of y'all out there have heard that? I know you have because we've heard it many times. Yes.
That was the reason we didn't want another one of those.
Yeah.
Well, time out. It couldn't have been a runaway convention because the states ratified the product that came out of that convention. The states said, that's exactly what we sent you there for. And the history is really clear that the states have control over their delegates. The example I love to use all the time is the states when they sent their delegates from Pennsylvania to the Second Continental Congress, and that's not a normal authorized body because the states had their the Continental Congress was kind of like the Constitutional Convention gathering. It was an outside of government body, and so you had Pennsylvania send them there and says, "Do not vote for independence." So all their delegates did not vote for the Declaration, but then they sent new instructions to their delegates and said, "Vote with all the other states. If all the other states go with independence, you go for it too." And so the other states went for independence, but half of the delegates in Pennsylvania did not go for independence. They voted contrary to their state's instructions. Those 5 were called home and replaced with 5 new delegates who went the other direction. So it was real clear. The states had control of their delegates. It was not a runaway convention. We know that because the states ratified what came out of it. They didn't say, "What did you give us? This isn't why we sent you." They said, "Yeah, here's the Constitution we want." So it's really clear, and that's kind of what has gotten you and me on the other side of this. Is I don't think it hurts the Constitution to use the Constitution, quite frankly.
One of the things we've talked about before that was really a game changer for me was this idea of if something happened there, when I realized the relief valve that the founders gave us. No matter what happens at a convention of states, it doesn't become part of the Constitution. It goes back to the states.
That's right.
It has to be ratified. And just adding it up and realizing that only 13 states could kill any amendment that comes out.
Let me change that. It's not 13 states. It's one chamber in 13 states.
That's right.
And so think of New York City. Think of the senators from New York. How blue is that?
Yeah.
Hey, the Republicans control the Senate in the state of New York. So that's a really blue state. And
yet you could kill it there.
And you got New Hampshire, really blue state, and Republicans have one of the chambers there. They're not going to give you a new constitution.
Yeah.
You have the same thing with Pennsylvania. So you look at even the really blue states. I don't care how pessimistic you are. You can name 13 chambers that would say no to this, and that's all it takes to stop this. So it can't be a runaway. There's no way for it to be a runaway.
Well, we've got a special guest with us tonight that has really spent a lot of time on this, and he's actually been a great hero in a lot of areas for our nation, specifically that of education for sure. Mike Farris, Patrick Henry University, Homeschool Legal Defense, I mean, all the different things that he's done, cases he's argued before the Supreme Court, and also in teaching the Constitution to thousands and thousands of folks. Mike, it's always good to have you, man. We are thrilled to have you here with us on WallBuilders Live, the webinar version.
Rick and David, it is great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Well, man, we're sorry about our technical issues. Thanks for staying with us. We're glad we didn't lose you there in Virginia, but we're glad you're with us. And I got to ask you, man. Now, you got a university to run. You've got a national organization. Why was this so important to you that you would devote so much time to it?
Well, after the 2012 election, I basically came to the conclusion that our country was going to crash and burn. Our liberties were going to be absolutely curtailed. there's a lot of measures of the problems with our government. The national debt is the tip of the iceberg, is the easiest to quantify. But I just looked at the situation and said, liberty is going to die in this nation if we don't do something about it. And so because I've been a student of Article 5 for over 30 years, I litigated one of the last Article 5 cases in our federal court system. It went to the Supreme Court. That was on the Equal Rights Amendment when Congress tried to change the ratification deadline for the ERA. I represented 4 Washington state legislators in challenging the constitutionality of that. So I became a student of Article 5 as a very young lawyer, and I've been in practice now for about 37, 38 years. And so that was a long time ago, but I've been a student and fan of Article 5 ever since. And I basically said, Washington, D.C. will never fix its own problems. And the founders gave us the power to use the power of the states to take away power from Washington, D.C. And so I said, it's time. It's time to do something before it's too late.
You know, and you said something at the conference we had with legislators last year that really stuck with me. You used the phrase that we need a solution that is as big as the problem.
That's exactly right. You know, there's a lot of things wrong with the government, all of which can be categorized as there's a huge disparity between the Constitution as written and the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. And if we were able to fix 4 or 5 of those big disparities, the power to tax and spend under the General Welfare Clause, the power to regulate under the Commerce Clause, the power of the executive branch to make law, even though Article 1, Section 1 says all legislation needs to come through Congress. You fix 4 or 5 things like that, then we really have a big solution. We don't need 50 amendments or 70 amendments, but a handful of strategic amendments will solve the big problems of our country. And the founders believed that good structure leads to good government. Good checks and balances leads to good government. And when the Supreme Court has said 2 really key things about checks and balances, they've said that under the General Welfare Clause in the Obamacare case, there is no constitutional limitation on the power of Congress to tax and spend. I don't want to live in a country where there's no limitation on Congress on its power to tax and spend. The second thing it said is about 30 times the Supreme Court has said there is no check on our power realistically other than the court's own internal sense of self-restraint. I don't want to live in a country where there's no better check on the Supreme Court than that. And these are the kinds of things that the states can legitimately address. We gripe and moan and complain. It's time to stop griping and complaining and do something constructive by using the actual text of the Constitution to find the solution to these big problems.
Okay, so let's think about, I guess, talk about some of the reasons why people are concerned about doing a convention of states. And first, let me just toss that out to you. What do you hear as the main objection that you'd want to tackle first tonight?
Well, the main objection from conservatives is the concern that the convention would not be limited to the power, to the subject matters in our call. Our call asks for a convention for the purposes of imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and imposing term limits on federal officials. And that would include both members of Congress and the judges. And so that's the subject matter. And people, conservatives at least, say that's all well and good. And if we were guaranteed that the convention would stick to those things, then they would be supportive, but they're afraid that they'll do other things, wild things like repeal the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, as if that could realistically happen. And there's no realistic reason to believe that that can happen. It's just simply you have to suspend political reality to believe, for the very reasons that you and David outlined. A single chamber in 38 states can stop any amendment that is contrary to the call. Moreover, the most important thing internally in the convention itself is you vote one state, one vote. And so even though on a population basis, a lot of the big states are pretty liberal. I mean, California is a big state and it's pretty liberal. Texas is also a big state and it's pretty conservative, but nonetheless, people are afraid of the big states. But it's one state, one vote. And Republicans control a majority. 27 state legislatures are controlled both houses by Republicans. Nebraska is officially nonpartisan, but it's really a Republican state. So you've got 28. And you can't get a majority vote in that chamber unless you get a whole bunch of Republican states to join you, including there are 5 states where the Republicans control one house and the Democrats control another. And so you don't get to a majority with just the 17 or so Democrat states that exist.
And Mike, you said a single chamber in 38 states. You meant a single chamber in 13 states, right? Only 13 to kill one, 38 to pass one.
I did. I misspoke. It's a single chamber in 13 states to kill it.
Yeah, and you mentioned Second Amendment. I think I can throw a rock from my house in Austin, Texas, to 13 states that would vote no if anybody got rid of the Second Amendment at a convention. So it's not, like you're saying. I mean, the political realities are that something like that is just absolutely it could not happen. Let me jump to one of our questions from the audience, Mike, if we can. This one's from Paul. He says the reactions from people concerning the Article 5 convention is polarized. I'm inclined to want to explore the potential simply because the framers bothered to include it in the Constitution, and as a free people, we're at the precipice. So agreeing with you that we are in danger. But he said, it causes me great consternation to know that George Soros is enthusiastic about an Article 5 convention. What could devious statists possibly have in mind that would attract them to this approach? Should we assume that any strategy we devised must include the presumption that a fifth column attack to subvert the Constitution is inevitable? So I hear this one, why are left-wingers and socialists wanting a convention of states, which I haven't heard of that many of them, but I have heard this claim that Soros would like to see one. What's your response to that?
Well, if George Soros can get 34 states to pass an application that supports his agenda, he would have the ability to back a successful convention of the states. But it's the same reason that George Soros supports leftist candidates for the U.S. Senate. Nobody would say, well, because George Soros supports leftist candidates for the Senate, we can't support conservative candidates for the Senate. It's just a political tool. It'd be like saying, well, George Soros funds bloggers. Conservatives can't use bloggers. It's just a political tool. The only concern would be if George Soros could hijack our effort. That would be a legitimate concern. And for the reasons that we've already talked about, that's just not possible. He would have to secretly bribe thousands of state legislatures, and everybody would have to keep it a secret. It's just simply not humanly possible for him to do that. I mean, he can participate in the political process just like anybody else. He can back U.S. senators. We can back U.S. senators. He can try to get liberal states to pass Article 5 applications. We can try to get our states to pass a conservative Article 5 or more federalist Article 5. Our agenda really is to transfer the authority back to the states. And if liberal states want to promote generous socialism, let them try it. And if some states want to promote stingy socialism, let them try it. And if other states want to promote freedom, then we'll see that and we'll see how it works. And the laboratory of democracy will be back in business and will be stopping the situation where Congress controls everything. So George Soros, his empire is big cities, big government, and big media. He has a lot of power in Washington, D.C., has very little power in most of the states, and we can win. This is where the people control. I'm not afraid of George Soros. I'm not afraid of the ACLU. I'm not afraid of President Obama or Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi. The people ultimately control this. And if we can have about 1% or a little less than 1% of the American public stand up, show up, and speak up, we will win this effort. We can pass all these kinds of amendments and get them ratified in 38 states with about 1% of the American public if we will actively work on it.
If people just take action, and David, you've heard that too. You've had to feel that same question about this.
That the source question I hear a lot, and people use that as a reason not to be involved. And let me throw a couple of things out on that. The Soros thing, like the runaway convention, like everything else, is a fear factor. And people say, "Oh, I'm scared that this is going to happen more." And fear, the problem with fear is it puts you on the defensive, not the offensive. When you're scared of something, you want to defend yourself from whatever is out there. when you get rid of the fear, then you go on the offensive. And the only way you win is not on defense, it's on offense. The National War College in Washington, D.C. teaches the famous course, the nine principles of war. Defense is not a principle of war. If you want to win a war, you don't go on defense, you go on offense. And the military actually teaches that defense is a temporary condition in which you reorganize to go back on offense. So the thing of, Soros is that, look, I'm not scared of Soros. And as Mike said, I mean, we'll fight this debate in the political arena and we'll win. There's no question about it that we will, but I'm not going to let the fear of Soros back me off. And as Mike gave some examples, I'm going to give a corollary example, something that's been happening in the news recently. My political philosophy is extremely different from Hillary Clinton's. I mean, there's not much in common anywhere.
Yeah.
The one thing I have in common with her is she has been saying the last 2 weeks, the greatest, most influencing book in her life is the Bible. Well, I will say that's my greatest, most influencing book.
Now, that in and of itself is news, but I think we need to alert the media because David Barton and Hillary Clinton, he just said he agrees with Hillary Clinton on something. This is news.
But see, the thing is, her reading of the Bible leads to abortion. It leads to same-sex marriage.
Right.
So am I going to back off and not use the Bible because Hillary Clinton is using the Bible?
Because she's misapplied it?
Yeah, because she loves the Bible, so I must be wrong in loving the Bible. No. You don't run things like that. Who cares if George Soros wants to have the convention? That's fine. That doesn't back us off in any way. So get rid of the fear stuff. And so much of the argument you hear is what if, and it could be, and it might happen. Yeah, and it might have a blizzard in Texas on the 14th of July, and we might get hit by a meteor tomorrow at noon. Don't worry about the what ifs. Don't get the fear stuff. Go on the offense with this stuff, and it's time to go on the offensive and get our federal government back.
Absolutely. Mike, I'm going to throw a technical question at you first, and then we'll get to some strategy questions that we've received. This one's actually a Twitter question from Kit1288. Do the states have to ratify exactly what comes out of the convention, or can they ratify separate parts of what comes from the convention?
It will be just like the Bill of Rights. There will, under our application, which is basically the same approach as Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, there can be, 3 to 7 to 8 to 10 amendments, something like that. And just like the original Bill of Rights, when 12 amendments were sent out and 10 were initially ratified, we can do the same things. The states will vote yes or no on each of the proposed amendments. So if there's a balanced budget amendment, a term limits amendment, an amendment that reins in the Supreme Court, an amendment that takes away the ability to make treaties that control domestic policy of the United States, let's say 7, 8 amendments like that, the states will have, 38 states will have to agree on those amendments one by one.
Okay, so then let's take that to a strategy question in terms of how to have this convention and what would be covered. We had several questions on this. I'll try to summarize a couple of them real quick here. One's from Mike, one's from Charles. Essentially, they're asking why have a single issue application instead of specific amendments that are adopted by the states and that they say to the convention you can only adopt these specific amendments instead of a topic. So what's the strategy behind making it open to a topic itself?
Well, there's a real legal question whether or not states can ahead of time write the text and bind the convention to exact text. There is no doubt that the states can bind their delegates to discuss only the issues that are before them. The 3 topics that we laid out. You can make the delegates stick to the agenda, but as a practical matter, you're going to want to write something that's going to pass in 38 states. And so if we're only going to do one, let's take the balanced budget. If we're going to only do a balanced budget, let's say it takes 7 to 10 years to get that through. But we need not only a balanced budget, but we also need limitations on taxing. We need limitations on spending. We need to stop the misuse of regulations. We need to take away the ability of the general welfare clause to force programs like Obamacare down our throat. If we're going to fix the general problem of the federal government having too much power, we don't have 10 and 20 years to do it one at a time. It's going to take, let's say, 7 years in a best case scenario to get this done. At the end of 7 years from now, I want to have a solution to a bunch of problems, not just one, and then we start over. I don't think the country has that long, and the people won't get excited about a single thing. Politics is coalition, and if people see Well, my favorite thing is going to move forward, and 4 or 5 other things that I kind of like are moving forward. You can build coalitions around those kind of plans.
Yeah.
Really hard to get grassroots momentum around a single issue. The balanced budget is an idea that's been around for 40 years. We've never been able to get to 34 states because there's not enough grassroots momentum behind that single idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good strategy. Dave?
Yeah, let me add what Mike was saying too, because when the thing about limiting the states can control their delegations, but the content of the amendment is a real question, as Mike said. Go back to the original Bill of Rights, as Mike pointed out, because he talked about the ratification process. But when they got together to frame the original Bill of Rights, as I recall, there were, I think, 7 or 8 states that had their proposals for the Bill of Rights or amendments. One state, I think, had eight amendments they wanted, and one state had 19. So they got together and they worked it out into the 12 that they sent to the states. Some of them covered the same issues, some of them didn't cover the same issues. And yet, even though one state may have raised one issue, the other state said, we didn't think about that. That's really good. And it got ratified in the Bill of Rights. So when you get them into that room, if you bind them down with a particular language, you really limit yourself. And I'll give you an example. When Oklahoma passed the American Law for American Courts Act there, it got struck down real quickly. But the other states looked at that and said, no, we could have written the language a whole lot tighter, a whole lot better. And so it's gone through the other states.
And they've been able to fix it and make it better.
They've been able to fix it because they changed the language. So if they had taken Oklahoma's language and gone to the convention with that and said, here's what we're going to pass, and the other states said, no, we got better language, and Oklahoma said, we didn't see that. And that's why you want that input of having these folks there to be able to say, yeah, that is a better suggestion than what we had. It still gets the same heart of the content, but it makes it so much tighter when you have the experience of other people and other delegates in other states there. And as Mike said, you can build a coalition because, some states wanted the Second Amendment, a big thing in theirs, and others wanted religious liberty and freedom of conscience, and others wanted no pay raises for congressmen. Well, once you got them into that Bill of Rights, those 12 things, 10 of them got ratified because they built a coalition around those multiple things. And like Mike said, you cannot do this in 10 separate constitutional meetings. You can't have a convention of states 10 times. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, Mike got an email question here from Jones. She said, Congress and the president don't follow our Constitution now. Why do you think they would follow new amendments? And actually, she does ask, why not use nullification? She says it's provided for in the Constitution. David and I have done several programs on that. We don't agree with that. We're not for nullification when you think it's unconstitutional. But rather than getting down that rabbit trail, why do you think that they would follow any amendments that came out of a convention of states?
Well, there's 2 constitutions. It's not exactly accurate. I mean, while I agree with the sentiment of this person, it's not exactly accurate to say that they don't follow the Constitution. They follow the wrong Constitution. They're following the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Rather than the Constitution as written. And so, I mean, once in a while the Supreme Court gets it right. The recent Second Amendment cases by the Supreme Court are pretty much dead on. Many of the Fourth Amendment cases of the Supreme Court, not all of them, but many of them are right on. They're right in square with original intent. And so there are other things that we get right. But there's a few important things that we're getting really wrong. The General Welfare Clause, the Commerce Clause, and the other things. And if we rewrite the General Welfare Clause rather than saying general welfare, which gives them the idea that they have broad language that gives them a lot of flexibility, if it says, the federal government cannot spend money on any topic for which the states are jurisdictionally competent to spend money, the General Welfare Clause goes away. I mean, the problems with it go away. And if Commerce Clause is restated as the United States Congress, under the Commerce Clause, has the power to regulate shipping and nothing else. Most of the problems that we have with the Commerce Clause go away. And so it's really the Supreme Court you got to aim at. The Supreme Court does follow constitutional amendments, usually for a long time. And let's say, we put this in, we fix the Commerce Clause, we fix the General Welfare Clause, and 50, 75, 100 years from now, the Supreme Court starts to stray. Well, 2 things. First, we've had 50 to 75 years of good government. That's a big thing. We did a good thing by stopping runaway spending for the next 50 to 75 years. Secondly, we have taught America that they can use this process. And so if Washington, D.C. ever dares to start building its power again, we can do the process a second time 20 or 30 years from now, and we'll fix it again. By having this power, it will change everything in Washington, D.C. If Washington, D.C. is afraid of the states and afraid of the people, Washington, D.C. changes forever.
You know, so if I'm understanding you right, I like how you said that there's basically two constitutions out there. There's the real Constitution and the original intent of the Constitution, and then there's this interpreted Constitution by the court. So a congressman can stand up and say, well, I'm following the Constitution because I'm doing what the court said the Constitution says. And what you're saying is a convention of states gives us a chance to redefine or really go back to the original definition, make it clear in the Constitution that that's the original definition. And they have to start over with their misinterpretations. And that could take 50 years because, like you said, they will tend to follow that amendment for decades before you start seeing them make it what Jefferson said, wax in their hands.
That's exactly right. And one of the amendments that we certainly need to address is changing the nature of the Supreme Court so that it no longer has no realistic check and balance on it. There are a number of good ideas out there. Mark Levin has proposed some ideas that are sound and are worthy of investigation. My idea on how to fix the Supreme Court is kind of an ironic thing. The court has fallen in love with international law. And so I have a degree in public international law from the University of London. I wanted to be able to fight UN treaties on a more effective basis. So I went and got a lot of opposition research and got an LLM in the process. And the European Court of Human Rights gives us a really good idea of how to fix the U.S. Supreme Court. That court has 46 countries. They have 46 judges. Every country appoints one judge for a limited time, and they sit in panels of 9 normally. Now, they do have a procedure that in rare cases, all 46 judges can participate in writing in a case. And there's no reason we can't do that for the Supreme Court. Have the states appoint 50 judges. You draw up panels of 9. You hear most cases. 50 judges in writing can review exceptional cases. But if you have state-appointed judges for 8 years and no longer where Justice Kennedy is controlling everything in the country because one man swings everything, this nation changes radically, and the Supreme Court becomes what the founders intended in the first place, and that is the least dangerous branch of government.
Yeah, man, good stuff. Okay, a Twitter question here for you from Paul. Who chooses the delegates? I think the correct term, if I learned it right from you, is commissioners. Is that correct? And he also said, I live in New York and don't want only New York City delegates sent to the convention. So who gets to choose?
Well, in New York, the Senate is Republican, as David has noted earlier. The House is Democrat. They're going to have to work together and appoint the delegates from New York. The legislature in every state appoints the delegates. And so they will. The recommendation is they appoint a relatively low odd number, but the states can choose whatever they want. If they want to appoint 11, they can appoint 11. If they want 3, they can appoint 3. My own recommendation is they appoint 7 or 9, but they caucus on every vote, and it's one state, one vote. And so, but again, a majority of the states in this country are controlled by Republicans, 28 states if you count Nebraska. And so the Republicans' state legislatures will appoint delegates. And so we walk in with a majority of Republican votes on day one. And, as long as the Republicans hold steady, nothing crazy can happen. Maybe they won't send people that are conservative enough to fix everything we want to fix. Maybe we'll get 75% or 85% of the ideal, but I would rather, get some good amendments out.
Yeah.
We're going to get some good amendments. We may not get everything, but the chances of a bad amendment are 0.
Well, and let me ask this of both of you guys, Mike and David. What have you noticed a change out there, not just in folks like us that live, breathe, and eat this stuff, but are you sensing an attitude change towards a convention of states? Are people more willing to have one? They understand we're at the precipice? I mean, have you seen over the last year any difference in their attitudes?
Let me take that first shot. I can tell you what I see. It's a whole lot like Common Core. I think the poll this week, 42% of people don't have a clue what Common Core is. Now, of those who have a clue, they've got pretty definite opinions.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm seeing is a whole lot of folks don't know what a convention of states is, but I can tell you that 3 years ago, 95% of the people I talked to were absolutely adamantly opposed to it regardless. And I would say that right now, I'm probably hearing 65% of people supporting the idea of a convention of the states. So among those who seem to know something, it is definitely moving in a different direction over the last 3 years. But I think still, from my vantage point, most people don't know what it is because, again, we talk about this on the program, but in the election of 2012, 70% of the nation who voted did not know the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. 65% did not know the role of judges, and 62% of voters could not name the three branches of government. So if you can't name the three branches of government, you probably have never heard of Article 5. You don't even know how many articles there are. But of those who have heard, there is a definite swing happening, as evidenced by the fact that state legislatures are now voting on this. When that hadn't happened in a bunch of years.
Yeah, Mike, that's kind of what I've seen as well. When I started my Constitution classes 4 or 5 years ago, almost everybody in the room was against it, and it seemed like I was the only one advocating for it, and I had just begun to be for. Actually, it's probably only 3 years ago, really, when that started. Yeah. And then, in the last year, I've seen that swing from nobody for it in those classes to half the room being for it, and now about 6. I think your number's right. Mike, what are you seeing around the country?
Well, I see the same thing. The swing is all dramatically in the direction of favoring this for two reasons. One is people are starting to learn the history of Article 5 more effectively, more accurately. And then secondly, people are recognizing how bad the situation is. There's an appropriate reluctance of the American public to want to amend the Constitution about anything. Yeah. And so, but people are saying, look, with Obamacare, with the NSA spying on everybody, with all the stuff, the IRS destroying the records, if one of us destroyed our hard drives in the middle of an audit, we'd go to jail. And they just see a criminal government out there, and people are saying this is time to do something, and they realize the founders are doing it. Now, some of the best evidence of the change of public opinion is right there in Texas. The Republican Party of Texas just a couple of weeks ago adopted a pro-Convention of the States platform, whereas the last Texas platform had a plank in opposition to a constitutional convention. Now, that's an important lesson, actually. The plank against the constitutional convention is still in the Texas platform. I'm against a constitutional convention because what a constitutional convention is, you're writing it all over and you're not using Article 5 and you're not bound by the rules of Article 5. This isn't that. This is not a constitutional convention. People who say it's a con don't know their history and don't know the text of the Constitution. This is a convention of the states. That's the historically accurate term from the very first application under Article 5 made by Virginia in November of 1788. And so we know for a fact that these are distinct, different animals. They're under the rules of Article 5, and it's safe, it's effective, and the public is coming our way.
One of our email questions said, I hope you'll address what Mark Levin has presented as his solution via Article 5, the pros and the cons. And I do want to mention his book, Liberty Amendments. You mentioned it earlier. I think it's one of the most important books of our lifetimes, really, if we want to save the Republic. He really lays it out well. And our question is, do you think there will eventually be a unified action or front, certainly from those that advocate for this and for conservatives? And they also ask, there are some folks out there who have been very critical of the plan, obviously John Birch Society and some of those, Chris Ann Hall and others. Mike, I'll just throw out there, I think some people enjoy just being against and it maybe gives them a platform. And so they maybe have a knee-jerk reaction to this rather than really studying it and really looking at how important it is. So we're not going to get everybody on board with this, are we?
Right. No, we're not, but we're seeing if you just look at the momentum of conservative leaders and see where we are, David Barton, you and me, we're three conservative leaders. Glenn Beck has joined our ranks. There are
Sarah Palin.
Of course, Sarah Palin has joined. Alan West has joined our ranks. Mike Huckabee, U.S. Senator Tom Coburn. Many other people are starting. The momentum is all in one direction, and the only national leaders of any import that are against this really is Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis is a wonderful woman. She's been in this position for 40 years. She also argues that the Constitution was illegally adopted. I don't agree with that. I think the Constitution was lawfully adopted, and that historical mistake, I think, has led my dear, wonderful friend Phyllis to reach a wrong conclusion. In a 50-year career of absolute perfection, she's entitled to one mistake.
That's right. We love her too. Believe
That's
it.
right.
I love her. Phyllis is wonderful, but we need to get the history right, and we're going in the right direction.
Hey, and Mike, if I'm going to interrupt you just for 1 second before you leave Phyllis, because one of our questions actually hits that, and they said, I love Eagle Forum, but Phyllis really hated the idea of a convention of the states when the ERA amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment, was out there. Do you think that's why her animosity for convention of states is so high?
Not really. Those are
Really?
two different issues.
Okay.
The ERA didn't come through the convention of the states. The ERA came from the permanent constitutionally amending convention that sits in Washington, D.C. called Congress. Every single day, they have the power to propose any amendment they want on any subject they want. And the reason they don't send out crazier ideas than they do is because they know 38 states will defeat them. If they thought they could get away with repealing the Second Amendment, there have been times in recent years where there was 2/3 majority of both houses of Congress where they would send that out and try it. But they know political reality, and they're not going to waste their time doing something nutso because they know that the states will kill it. And so but Phyllis's objection to the ERA, because I was there, I helped her. I litigated against the misuse of the process on the Equal Rights Amendment. Phyllis and I traveled together in the late 1970s, working on that side by side. And she and I both were against the ERA on substantive grounds, that we thought that our law should allow for differences between men and women. One of the arguments we made is, if you do this, it's going to lead to homosexual marriage. And people laughed at us. Homosexual marriage, that's the craziest idea in the world. Well, it turns out we weren't so crazy after all. But those are two different things. Phyllis, for example, supports an amendment that's in Congress. In fact, you guys support the amendment in Congress that I've been the lead draftsman of, and that's the Parental Rights Amendment. That's and right. So we can support or oppose individual amendments on the substance of them, and Phyllis and I are going to agree 99 times out of 100 on the substance of amendments. The only difference we have on this is the procedure. She thinks this procedure is not a good idea. I think this procedure is the only way we have to save the American Republic.
David, we've often been told our listeners are maybe the most active audience in radio out there. They love to take action on the things that we have. So, Mike, let's talk about some of the action out there. We've got two questions regarding this in individual states. The first one from the state of Washington. It says, we get some info on this from Freedom Foundation, but no status of Washington State's participation in taking action as of yet. Do you have any inside information about this? And Mike, I think on your website, you can click on a state, right, and find out what's happening in that particular state or somehow get involved in that particular state? You
sure can. Yeah, so the website to come to is conventionofstates.com. It's conventionofstates.com. And I'm from Washington State originally. That's where I broke into political and legal life. And my primary law license is in Washington State. We definitely have plans for Washington State, but it's one of the more liberal states that are actually in our plans. And we are going to be building a grassroots network, and we'd love to have you and really people from any state to be involved. But I can guarantee you, but if you come to the website, you can click on it. Next year, we're going to be focused on about 20 states. This year, our application in our very first effort passed in Georgia, Florida, Alaska, all the way through. Those states are complete for phase one. We got it halfway through. We got through the House of Representatives in both Alabama and Arizona. We ran out of time in Alabama, and we hit a senator in Arizona that his mother-in-law was the head of Eagle Forum for the state, so we had a mother-in-law problem. But we're going to come back. We're going to come back with a vengeance next year in Arizona, and we're going to win in Arizona. But our goal is to pass it in 20 more states in 2015 legislative session, and then to clean it up and get to 34 states in 2016 and begin the Convention of States sometime in the fall of 2016. That's our ideal goal. If that drifts a year or so, we'll live with that. But if we don't get this done in the next 3 to 4 years, I fear for the future of the country. The time to act is right now.
Yeah.
Well, the secret to a mother-in-law problem is to compliment her cooking. But I don't think that's going to help you in Arizona. Okay, so we did have a one from, let's see, a question about California. So this one's from Hayden, says, what are we to do with the states like California that are very liberal? Try to get them to pass an application to call for convention of states? And I think you just addressed this a little bit in terms of you're actually strategically targeting certain states. So are there any states where you really don't want to have an effort?
Well, California, I mean, we would welcome an effort for our application anywhere. We've actually, Mark Meckler, who's the president of Citizens for Self-Governance, that's the sponsoring nonprofit organization that's backing the Convention of States project. Mark has talked about this in Berkeley, California, and he asked the people in Berkeley, who do you want making the policy decisions on domestic issues for Berkeley? Do you want the Berkeley local government? Do you want Sacramento? Or do you want Washington, D.C.? And the answers in Berkeley are, well, either Sacramento or Berkeley, but certainly not Washington, D.C. They think Washington, D.C. is too conservative. And so if California was thinking strategically, California and Democrats would get on board by saying, yes, we want to move the power away from Washington, D.C. and bring it back to the states. And, blue states can do blue stuff and red states can do red stuff, and we'll see which works. And so that would be great for everybody if everybody just put their thinking hats on and think straight. But realistically, we're not expecting anything out of California. Right now, what the people from California can do is get on your Facebook page, you join up so you know what's going on, but make sure you tell all your friends in the 40 states that are a little more conservative than California that they need to join and help us as well. And so just the networking, people telling people how to help is really, really important.
Man, that's huge, because the tools we have today versus the founding era, we don't have to put a dispatch rider out there to, spend 2 weeks getting a message there and back. Someone in California, even if their state legislature is not going for it, they can absolutely help spread the word all over the country.
With technology today, nobody is any longer allowed to say, I can't do anything.
That's right.
Everybody's got a platform today. Everybody can reach their however many hundred friends, whatever it is. Nobody's got the excuse of I don't have a platform anymore, because everybody's got one.
Hey, Mike, here's one a question that kind of touches back on that strategy and the different organizations that are out there. This is from one of your district captains for Convention of States in Georgia. The question for Mike is, what's the possibility of bringing in some of the other Article 5 groups under the Convention of States banner? As the old adage about strength in numbers is certainly true. Is this something the Assembly of State Legislators can or will address at their next meeting in Atlanta or wherever it's held? So can you address that? There's 3 or 4 groups that are very pro Article 5, and I think a couple of them actually are made up of state legislators, and I know you're corresponding with them and speaking with them. It's important to have have them working on a little bit different aspect of this, right?
Right. The Assembly of State Legislators, that was originally called the Mount Vernon Assembly in honor of where they held their first meeting, is working on an important implementation part of this project. They're writing the proposed draft rules to use in the convention, regardless of the subject matter. And so that's really important, and that would be used no matter whose Convention of States is going to be called. There's really only 2 Convention of States efforts that have gotten any kind of material traction. The Balanced Budget Amendment people have been working at this for about 40 years, and depending on who you ask, in my opinion, they have about 18 or 19 states that have valid applications that should be aggregated. Some states' balanced budget applications are written in such individualistic kinds of ways, they really aren't likely to be able to be properly aggregated with the other states. And so they've been at it a long time, and there's both political reasons and legal reasons why I have concluded that that's not the best strategy. The legal reasons are there's absolutely going to be a court challenge if they ever get to 34, because there's a big disparity in the way those are written. Our application is being passed absolutely identical language on the operative sections of it. The whereas clauses don't have to be identical, but the operative language should be and is in our application absolutely identical. That's not true about the BBA. So they're going to have a legal problem. Beyond that, they have a political problem because people understand that if you have a balanced budget amendment alone, that it's not going to be a big solution, and it can be written in a way where you have to balance the budget unless it's windy outside, or unless Congress doesn't want to, or they can write exceptions. But if it's a part of a whole package where you limit spending authority by fixing the general welfare clause, you limit regulatory authority by fixing the commerce clause. When you put it as a part of a package and you put tax limitations on, then a balanced budget amendment is full, robust, and well done. And it brings the grassroots. So there's both political reasons and legal reasons why I think that this is the best approach. And there is kind of a gentleman's understanding with the leaders of the BBA and the leaders of the Convention of the States. That is, whichever one gets close to 34, the other team needs to go help them get the last state or two.
That's good.
I think that's going to be us. But right now we're working side by side. There's no legal reason, no political reason that a state legislature can't pass both.
That's right.
And so I prefer the Convention of the States, but there's no reason we do work cooperatively on some level, and we're going to continue that cooperation.
That's great. That's exactly what we need. We have a question from something we said earlier. David said, I don't understand how you can say that the chances of a bad amendment are zero. And I think I was one that said that. I probably shouldn't say zero, but they're very, very, very unlikely based on the safety valve. But he does say, I think you run the risk of getting milquetoast useless amendments when the language needs to be agreed upon by so many. But guys, isn't that really what, I mean, all 27 amendments that we've got now had to be agreed on by so many.
Yeah, and it won't necessarily be a milquetoast, because if that's going to get defeated when it comes back to the states, those delegates to the convention know that. And they're political enough, and they're political folks, and they understand that they've got to deliver what the people want and what the people sent them there for. And so the fact that the people can get a hold of their state guys a whole lot easier than their federal guys makes it a lot more likely these guys will be responsive to where the people are, as opposed to Washington, D.C., who's pretty much checked out on the people. So I don't think there's a guarantee you'll get milquetoast out of this. I think it's actually the other direction. I think you may get some stuff that's too strong for some people,
yeah,
and they may go the other direction. But I think that the chances are very high that you get some really strong stuff out of this, because the state people feel passionate about this, as we all do in the grassroots. But we look at a U.S. senator and say, he doesn't listen to me anyway, so we don't even contact him anymore. I think you'll see a real grassroots surge in this. And as Mike has laid out, they've already got these 40 states that they plan to do turn over in the next 3 years as far as this amendment. And that shows you where the people are at the grassroots level.
Mike, what do you think about that in terms of how good a language we can get out of it?
Well, I think that what I meant earlier by we might not get everything we want is I really would like about 7 amendments. And I think we'll only get good amendments out, but I may not get all 7. Mark Levin has proposed 11, and we have a lot of overlap in our subject matter, and there's a lot of, in both Mark and I know that what we're really proposing is topics, and the exact language is going to be formed at the convention. But I think we'll get at least 3 or 4 really strong amendments, and I may not get all 7 that I want, or so on. But that's okay. And so that's what I meant by we may not get everything we want. I don't think we'll get any milquetoast. But, I guess there's some remote possibility of something bad. But in political reality, if you're just going to breathe political reality, I really do think the chance of getting any bad amendments is 0.
Yeah.
Because, you can't get 38 states to repeal the Second Amendment. I mean, I'm a member of the Education Committee of the Governing Board of the National Rifle Association. I'm an NRA board guy, and if I thought there was any chance of the Second Amendment being, at risk, I wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
But I believe, and I've been a First Amendment litigator for almost 40 years. If I thought there was any risk to the First Amendment, I wouldn't do this. I'm convinced there's not only no risk, virtually no risk at, being really gracious to the other side, but I think it's the only chance we got. And if I can just say one sentence about nullification, let's assume for the sake of discussion that you could do it. I don't think you can, but let's say you could. How many laws do we have to nullify? The entire Code of Federal Regulation needs to be nullified. There are tens of thousands of laws. 50 states times tens of thousands of laws is just not going to happen. But if we fix the general welfare clause, thousands of laws are nullified in an instant.
That's right.
And if we fix the Commerce Clause, thousands of laws are nullified the moment it's ratified. And if we go back to the rule that Congress has to pass all laws and administrative agencies can propose regulations, but they've got to be adopted by Congress, the Code of Federal Regulations in its entirety is nullified right now. The states working individually have a very difficult time to pull off nullification, but the states working together through the Convention of the States have the most robust power we have. They can nullify entire categories of law, not just the Common Core. We can take away the federal government's power to regulate education at all. And I'm against the Common Core. HSLDA has a great movie against the Common Core. But I want to take away the power of the federal government to ever regulate education again. And the way you get that done is through the Convention of the States.
Let me jump into on something Mike said, and I want to be real clear here, because Mike said politically the chances are zero, and I agree. I think the chances, however, are 100% that at the convention you're going to get some milquetoast and even some really bad amendments proposed. I think if Connecticut's got a delegation there, you're going to get some bad.
They'll propose it. Sure, they'll throw it out there.
And I think Massachusetts will, and I think if California comes, they will. But they still got to get it by the other guys.
That's
and
right.
You're starting with 28 out of the 50 votes that would be there, and there may not be 50 votes. It may be like Rhode Island, who doesn't send anybody. Yeah. You just have to have a majority who's there. So I think there'll be some bad stuff proposed, and I think there'll be some milquetoast proposed, but you're not going to, Mike's right. Politically speaking, the chances of getting something bad out of that convention are zero, because we already have the numbers stacked in the right direction as a result of what people have been doing in state elections, what we saw in 2010, what we're seeing now in 2014. I mean, this thing is going in a very fast conservative direction at the lower levels, and that's what you're going to see at the convention. It's going to take that kind of a tone.
And let's reiterate something here too, Mike, the one vote per state. And you mentioned it earlier, you already went over it, but I just want to reiterate that because some people think, well, yeah, but what if California sends 50 people and they outvote everybody there? Each state gets one vote, no matter how many delegates, commissioners, whatever we call them, actually come to the convention, right?
That's exactly right. And so, if a liberal state doesn't want to participate, yay and amen. That's fine. Stay home.
That's right, man.
It makes our job easier. And who'd want to eat tofu sandwiches anyway?
That's good. Hey, Mike, before we let you go now, if folks that want to learn more, or maybe some of their questions didn't get answered tonight, and we had a lot, folks, sorry, there's so many of you, we can't get to all of them, but you've gone through really on the website Convention of States and essentially answered virtually every question that could be asked about a Convention of States. So you've got some great tools there if people want to do more research, right?
We do. We have an abundance of materials, from one-page documents, half-page documents. There is a 300-page legislative compendium. If somebody wants to be an expert on this, they can read Rob Nadelson, who is a retired constitutional law professor, who is the expert in the country on Article 5. We hired him to write a full rule manual on how a convention would be run. And you can read it. And so you can find out anything and everything. And you can also go there to help. We don't want people just to be hearers of the word. We want them to be doers of the word. And so if we have 100 people in a legislative district, we're convinced in most cases that 100 people contacting their state legislators saying, we want you to support a convention of the states, we win almost every vote with 100 people. There'd be some more liberal places where we might need 1,000 people, but there's only 3,000 House districts in the country where we need people. 3,000 times 100 is 300,000 people. That's not very many. That's about 0.1% of the American public. But if we take the 1,000 per district, and let's just say we needed 1,000 in all per district in all 3,000 districts, that's only 3 million people. There are far more people who know about the Constitution and love the Constitution than 3 million. If we just simply will stand up and speak up, this issue will go to the people that participate. And if we can get someplace between 300,000 and 3 million people to participate, we will win.
Mike, I want to put your website in here real quick for folks to see if they don't already have it. Great tools there, excellent resources. You also have a phenomenal Constitution class that you make available as well that we want to encourage people to study more about the entire Constitution. Guys, I mean, this could be the most important tool for us saving the Constitutional Republic. It's time to use. I like how you put it, David. Don't be afraid to use the Constitution to save the Constitution.
Exactly right. And it is easy stuff, and this is something everybody can make a difference on. This is not, we say, well, what can I do to change the Supreme Court decision on marriage, or what can I do to reverse Obama's executive orders? This is not that. This is something you can do at your level with your state legislator to help fix the whole country. So this is a good time to get involved, a good project to get involved on.
Mike, God bless you, brother. We appreciate you being with us and appreciate all your work, not only on this issue, but education in general and all the things you do for her.
Well, we really appreciate your support and partnership. God bless you both.
Thanks.
Bless you, bro.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate you being on with us. One quick announcement for folks. If you want to do this again and be involved in a webinar, make sure you sign up for our emails. Go to wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. You'll be notified there. And David and I have a new program, Constitutional Live, coming out next week. And you can actually go to that web link, constitutionallive.com and wallbuilders.com, and get that for next week. David, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, this is just a good time to take, as that starting quote we had, John Jay, you diligently read and study, and then you assert the Constitution. Yeah. So now is the time. We've done the study of this thing. Now is the time to assert Article 5 of the Constitution to make a real difference.
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, if you're really going to follow the whole quote, you're going to do everything he said. It's not enough to study it, not enough to be ready. You got to go out and assert. You got to actually take action.
That puts it back on us.
Yep. And I was very pleased when we did the poll at the beginning of the webinar tonight. Most people got it. We're the ones that are responsible. We the people. We're the ones that have to defend the Constitution. So, folks, we hope you get involved. Visit conventionofstates.com to find out more about Article 5. Visit wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. Find out more about what we're doing here and how you can get involved. We appreciate you joining us on WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand undivided forever.